gonna let you see it?
The money and everything else.
Okay, okay, okay. It's always good to have that hard
Years.
interest.
He came over yesterday. We were apples to John Anderson,
Y'all didn't have a will before?
yeah, we'll have
What's the difference?
different wills.
Yeah, so wait, like a power of attorney and that kind of thing? Okay, yeah, for making decisions related. Counselor, yeah. Yeah. That's just those are never the things you want to think about, but for yourself and for your family, it really is better to think of those things.
My sister had hers.
Really?
And a doctor.
Huh. That's about as good a place as any, but maybe not legally, but. Yeah, yeah. Daughter. What's that? Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Turned upside down. Yeah, that was chaos.
See this old man.
Yeah.
Demo, man.
You working this day?
I'm working.
Watch you on the job.
Do a good job. I'll be watching you online.
Okay,
I usually try to,
yeah.
I'll stop.
Yeah. These two classes. Technology is a good thing when it works. It doesn't always work, but. No. Yeah, just. Yeah, you think about people that had that, before, like when people sick or had to miss, we're just not, what was
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, doing pretty well.
Where's your little woman?
Good question. I got here at 7:30 this morning, so.
Oh, yeah, it's not working.
We drove different. As long as she's back home, time to cook dinner. And these guys,
Yeah, she's got a lot of things done. I don't want to be the one
Arkansas,
because she's too good.
actually, her niece married Anthony Butler's wife. She's been in the hospital with some kind
Yeah, yeah.
of very rare,
I'm in person.
odd disease. She had fester places, blisters and stuff like that in the hospital. They thought she was doing better.
I'm
Good. You set records?
Anthony recovered hard of it.
Well, we are. I go down there. Sit on tell it every day.
Anyway, the stairs.
You can come in.
What's that? Big dog. I had it about all the winter, actually.
I brought
Yeah, Sandy read somewhere, she wants the blueberries. Good for memory. She bought blueberries and forgot to eat them. Back then, she did. There's a lot of things I don't see it.
Well, hello there. Sometimes seeing you here, well,
I would be there.
Yeah, but he cleans them wheels.
he does.
We can get started, please.
Good morning. How are you?
One of
Hey, good morning. How are you? Good to see you.
How about you? Oh, hey.
Oh, you do it 7 days.
You're right now.
Weather.
You're not a polar bear? It might.
I might have.
Morning. Hey. There's a couple of shots. Thank you. Morning. Okay, I was telling you.
Mom, I found those other watches.
I don't know what to do, but I'm
Well, I
This is kind of a, like, quite fit, or, yeah.
Yeah, I finally found them. I think, luckily, I was saying maybe, I guess I stuck them in there.
Yeah. I think some of the older impressions and videos and stuff is kind of funny to me. Like, people talk about, like, and if you kind of, like, you said it, like, they have any idea what they're talking about.
He stayed all afternoon.
Yeah, I don't think she was yet on paying the call for 2 hours. I know, but it's so crazy how she can't wait to get in the car. I think she can't.
Oh, yeah.
She can't wait to get in and can't wait.
That's just.
too much of a good picture. Of course it is. Yeah, Melanie, Megan went to the national soccer club game last night, at a soccer game. And she said Michael's not gonna be happy when she figures out I'm leaving because, obviously Michael wasn't going. And then I ended up finding the game on TV. I sent her a picture of it because she sent me a picture when she got there. And I sent her a picture. I said, look what I found on TV. And I screenshot. Yeah, they tied 0-0. They both made a goal on an offside. So the game just ended 0-0. It's the Major League Soccer. That's the Major League Soccer team.
I used to know that.
So does St. Louis. St. Louis has a team too, an expansion team. They opened their stadium since Mason and Abby have lived there. I would like to go to one of their games. I've seen the stadium. It's not. I've seen it national.
They've got a major national.
No, I'm soccer.
I saw them play. Oh,
Yeah, this is soccer. Yeah, I've seen St. Louis
I saw
play
them
soccer.
play before.
Yeah, I saw St. Louis and Detroit play a couple of years ago when I went up to St. Louis.
Well, that's a run.
But there's soccer season. Yeah, this was soccer though. I was like, that's a rough way to work. Play soccer is so cold. Mason's season's always started in February. Stadium, Megan had shown it to me and said, oh, but 8 is kind of closer to down, not all the way down. But after 8 down there, they play in. And she and Mercedes will be there. Been before, but not where it's called. Well, I mean, there were some of the stands, but no, I mean, it wasn't packed like it can be. She was on, she sent a selfie of herself, like her nose was red.
That's pretty neat.
And Millie hasn't been doing any of her yards for a reason. She hasn't done it in days. Because she'll go on the patio and then every time she comes right back, she's not done the whole loop and I don't know how long. Yes, she goes over to the side, yes. Yep. She'll go over there. No,
Warm up this week.
it is. It's supposed to be nice.
You'll have to make her run.
She will. She'll have to make it all the time. Yeah, when I'm not at the back door, sometimes people walk off instead of standing there. If I was cold, I would stand there because I know she'll run out. But she's been warming up a little bit. She hasn't gotten out. She's sleeping a little bit around the head. But if I'm not right back there, sometimes I'll hear her. Look back. I think it's going. Most of the time she sits there, but I've heard her come home.
She wouldn't get like this, but
Yeah, she's like, no, still not time.
I'm not doing that.
I did put some bird seed out this way. I saw where the bird scraps in the snow on our head. And I think I went back to the bird seed this way up because I was out and I cleaned out my bird finger and I put a hole in it. And I know nobody's coming around. I thought I was taking it. And like I said, I've seen a little dirt tracks in the snow, like, but they've been shaking the picture. But now they'll have some food.
I tell you, there's a bunch of rules like they were all around again yesterday. They get up in that tree, they dive down. Apparently there's some food out there.
All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started.
They dive down the back of the tree.
Maybe. Or not. Or not. Revelation chapter 3. Last week we covered verse 1, so now we're ready for verse 2. Try to do better. Revelation chapter 3, we're going to be in verse 2. We started, even last year, we went through the Gospel of John, then we went through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and now Revelation, we're just looking at all of the writings of John. And so, still working through the 7 churches that the letter of Revelation or Revelation was addressed to. But before we jump in, let's go to God in prayer. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time, this opportunity. Father, I thank you for this class and the opportunity you've given us to be together, to study your word together. I pray bless our time together. I pray for wisdom and understanding and insight. I pray that your Spirit will help us to see things as they are, to see things maybe that we haven't seen before in your word, that we could see the truth that is there, apply it to our lives, individually and as a church, be the people you called us. Father, I pray that you would move to that end so that your will can be done in all things. Pray in Christ's name. All right. So in Revelation chapter 3, verse 1, this is the letter to Sardis, the church in Sardis. And verse 1, the end of verse 1, this is what Jesus has to say about the church. I know your deeds. You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead. And so we talked quite a bit about that. And we're going to continue to talk about that some in verses 2 and 3. And this is why I'm going to get off a little bit, because this is why we always take so long. So I was thinking about, country music songs. You could, if I ever wanted to, I think I could write a pretty good sermon series based on lyrics and country music song titles. And when I thought of Sardis, I thought of Merle Haggard, Are the Good Times Really Over for Good? Because this church is like a snowball rolling down. I mean, they're dead. But yet, there's some hope here in the instruction in verse 2 and 3. So let's look at that. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die. For I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. Verse 3. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard, hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. So again, you see the words that just jump out. Wake up, strengthen what remains, remember, hold fast, repent. So in verse 1, they're described as a dead church. In verse 2, they're described as a sleepy church. What would be some characteristics of a church that is asleep?
No longer doing the things that they've done before. They've taken a rest.
Yeah. So they've taken a break, they've taken a rest, they've fallen asleep. What would it be describing a church that is asleep? What?
Just going through the motions.
Maybe just going through the motions, like not really giving a lot of thought. You're just asleep. You're lethargic. You're doing nothing. David?
I remember a story about, I think it was about Sardis, that it was built on a hill and they were attacked up that hill. And one of the reasons they were attacked is because the sentry was asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And they think Paul was referring to that very well-known story there. That doesn't answer your question, but I just thought I'd throw it out.
Yeah, they weren't paying attention. Yeah, that did come out like twice in their history. Like they were a city, like they built a fortress up on this Acropolis, and they felt like, nobody can get us. And twice in their history, they didn't pay attention, and somebody came in and destroyed their city. And so, when you know the history, you realize he's connecting a lot of things about this history of this city to how they're being described. So, deeds unfinished. Well, first of all, strengthen what remains. So there's still something there. There's still an ember that has the potential to come back to life and to light a fire in that church. But they've got to strengthen what is still there. Their deeds are unfinished. Sometimes I'm really bad about not finishing what I start. I really need to finish one thing before I start another. But I'll have about 6 or 7 things that I'm planning to do, and I don't finish hardly any of them. But this also could be just about the quality of their deeds. Like they've started to do something and they've not followed through. So, and how many times have we have good intentions, but we don't follow through? So their deeds are unfinished. Verse 3, remember. What's the importance or significance of remembering? Like, why does a church need to be remembering things? Why do we as disciples of Jesus need to be remembering? Like, what's the point of remembering? What happens when you don't?
You need to go back and remember what you have learned.
Right. Go back and remember what you were told. Remember what you were taught. Remember the gospel that was given to you, probably through John or one of the other apostles. Remember what you were taught. And if you don't remember, what's the danger? You can quickly forget. Like, we are forgetful people. And you will forget, and you will move in a direction that you would never have moved if you had remembered where you started and if you had remembered what you had received. And so we always have got to be people, and God throughout history set up these reminders for his people. Like when we do this, there's like, when we're doing the Passover, tell your children why we do these things. Generation after generation, tell your children why we do what we do so that they can remember what God has done for them.
Just with the history that was shared that I didn't know about the soldier that was asleep. Mm-hmm. And then you said it happened twice.
Yeah, it happened twice. So they didn't remember.
They did not remember.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you would think. If this happened to us once, like, all right, nobody falls asleep ever again.
Yeah.
But apparently a
few years later, they've forgotten again. Yeah.
There's a lot of educators in here, okay? And when you go through the process of teaching, you try to get people to remember. And it gets to a point of repetition and things like that. And I'm wondering if you mentioned a while ago, just going through the motions, the repetition of things, and not really, really refreshing your mind of what you are at, what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Cost or something like that.
And for us, isn't that both the blessing and the challenge of communion? Isn't that both blessing and the challenge of weekly Lord's Supper? Like it is a beautiful time to remember, but it can become something that we just do. And it can be something that we could even in a spiritual sense sleep through. But it's there for us to remember because God knows we have to remember, because if we don't, we forget and we go in a direction that we would never go in if we had been remembering.
Yeah, Moses warned the children of Israel when they got to the promised land not to forget God. And he knew they would soon forget him one generation away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that speech, Moses' speech, Deuteronomy 6, I think, that's so beautiful because that's also where he told parents, well, really the whole community of faith, teach these things to your children as you walk along the road and as you lie down and as you get up, because you're leaving the wilderness and you're about to go to the land of milk and honey. And he knew that in that situation, you're more likely to forget who God is. Okay?
And then they actually did.
Yeah.
7 times in the book of Judges alone, there's a cycle of things were good, they forgot about God, God sent an oppressor, they cried out for help, they sent a deliverer, and they got back to being good again. It lasted about a generation, and then it just, 7 times in the book of Judges, they did the same thing over and over again. And it became a major theme in the Jewish religion. You don't forget. You have to remember, it's why today they're so paranoid about forgetting the Holocaust, for example.
Yeah.
Because they don't want that memory to fade because of, whatever happened again.
Mhm. And they've also built in these times that we're going to pray, and this is what we're going to pray. But it's so easy to forget.
As I get older, it's a constant battle against the will to become comfortable. There's always a desire to relax, comfortable, take it easy. And in that comfort, you stop doing the things you should be doing. My wife has to constantly remind me of my tasks that I need to do. Because I'd rather sit on the couch, I'd rather go do something that I enjoy doing.
Don't go too far.
Hey, let's keep it.
We talked about that yesterday.
Hey, I just have to say, he's gone every other week, so the weeks he's home, yes, he has tasks. I'm like, I need these things done while you're here.
Yeah. Men especially need to be reminded. I think we could probably all agree about that. But yeah, just remember, understand we're forgetful people, and we need to remind ourselves, and we need to remind each other. That's the other thing that we leave out sometimes. Is like we need to be reminded and encouraged by each other, because we're all going to, be dealing with this at one point or another. Be distracted. So be alert. Remember what you receive. One of the things they talked about, like when he says, to be alert, to wake up, is maybe they didn't realize the seriousness of their situation. That can happen. Like you can kind of drift, and you can move to a place, and you don't realize how serious it is. And I thought about like in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is praying, and he's got Peter, James, and John with him, and they don't really understand the seriousness of the situation, because what do? Fall asleep, which I know that they've been up probably all night, with the Last Supper and all of that. But if they had understood, even Jesus told them what was about to happen, but if they had understood that, I think they would not have fallen asleep. And so maybe part of this is they didn't understand the seriousness of their situation. They didn't realize how far they had gone. So the idea of going to being comfortable or to be complacent. What does it mean to be complacent? Is that kind of a default for humanity, just to get to a place where you can become complacent? You don't care as much as you once did?
That comes along with contentment.
Mm-hmm.
Complacement and contentment fall hand in hand, because I remember when I was going through my training in the military, and much other you have gone through the military, you remember the slogan says, watch your six. Well, six means keeping your eye on what's in front of you, what's behind you, what's above you, what's below you, and what's to your left and right. And I think when we become complacent, we lose that sight, lose that ability to visualize what's around us. We just, as James said, we just become comfortable what we're in. And maybe this is where they're at.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this last week. This is the only one of the 7 churches that is not mentioned as being persecuted. And so when you talk about complacency doesn't happen when you're being persecuted. Complacency happens when things are good and you're wealthy and well-fed and you're comfortable. Complacency doesn't happen when you're persecuted. And maybe the reason that they weren't being persecuted is because they had just become like the rest of the people around them. They just had mixed in their pagan practice, their pagan practices with following Jesus, and so they're not being persecuted because they're no different than the world. It's when you're different that you're persecuted, and when you're persecuted, you're not complacent. When you're complacent, nobody persecutes you. All right, let's go to verse 4. So what else does Jesus have to say about the church in Sardis? Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white. Okay, again, history. This is like Sardis had a big garment industry. Like they made a lot of wool, they made a lot of clothes, and so the reference here is to clothing. And so what would not having soiled their clothes, maybe you have a different translation. That kind of reminds me of my Python. I don't want to go there. What does it mean to have clothes that aren't soiled?
Mine says not defiled.
Not defiled, which represents like a purity, like cleanness, purity, faithfulness. Soiling their clothes could be this intermingling of pagan traditions and pagan worship and, the Christian faith, which is kind of what, they haven't been Christians very long, and that's probably what all of them were doing, is I'm going to take this God, and I'm going to take this God, and this God, and this God, and I'm going to add, the God of Israel or Jesus to this mix, and then I've got all my bases covered, and all my gods are blessing me as I want to. And so maybe this soiling of their clothes is this intermingling of pagan practices and following Jesus, which can also happen to us today, right? Like we can be so influenced by culture and the world that we become, those kind of things can creep in and maybe change the way that we are living or the way that we are worshiping.
I heard a wise preacher say, if you're not being transformed, you're going to come.
Yeah. I'm probably going to say that again this morning. I don't think there's a third option there. I really don't think there's a third option. And so if you're standing still, you're conforming. So,
But there were people at the start that were still alive to Christ.
Yeah.
Even though the church was dead or sleeping.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, which speaks a lot to them, and Christ recognizes that. And so the promise there are really two promises, I guess. They're going to walk with me. So what would that kind of entail? They're going to be in a relationship with Jesus. That's probably also a reference to their salvation. I mean, they're going to be with me.
Left them.
He hasn't left them.
I haven't left him.
Right. And so, when you say about a few people, it's kind of like you could kind of have this, the whole rest of the church can be going this way, but as for me and my house, we're going this way. We're not going to be swayed by what all these people around us are doing. We're going to go this way, and we're going to be walking with Jesus. And dressed in white is that purity, that righteousness that we receive from Christ. It's not ours, but compared to those who have the impure clothes, or what did you say, the impurity or the defiled, it's not. We're dressed in white. We're dressed in purity and righteousness and faithfulness.
Jason,
I don't know. Are we?
well, I'm asking because I've got.
Oh, you got one? Okay.
So it's interesting to me because, he's talking about you have this church that's asleep. There's a group within that church that are still walking with you. And I think it speaks, and I recognize at this time there's probably not a lot of churches, right? You don't have a church on every.
No.
And I think the North kind of reflects that, where you don't have a lot of churches, and you attend a church that may not necessarily fall in line with where you're at spiritually, but you stay there. And we see it now where, because we have such a selection and opportunity to attend different churches, that, well, I don't really like what you're saying, so we're gonna let's get out of here. Rather than staying and speaking truth, rather than staying and encouraging, remind these people. We just abandon that church because we disagree with.
Yeah, I don't think they had many options, but hopefully like if these people are walking with Jesus, like hopefully they then, and especially after they receive this letter, like there could be it's not too late for this church. There could be a transformation, and they could have an influence, maybe more of an influence on them than them having a negative influence on them. All right, so there's another promise given in verses 5 and 6. Let's look at that. The one who is victorious, the one who overcomes, that's in almost every one of these letters. The one who is victorious, like them, will be dressed in white. And I will not blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So this is interesting. So even those who aren't dressed in white now can be dressed in white later if they overcome and if they are victorious. And then he talks about the book of life. And I didn't really even know this. Maybe you do this. Like in a lot of these ancient cities, they would actually, every city would have a book. Couldn't have been very large cities, but they would have a book and the names of the residents in that city. And if somebody would move or go away, they would, either mark that name out or whatever. I think about, I remember helping somebody, this is another rap, I'm helping somebody with trying to get a couple get a marriage license. And I didn't realize this, but like when you get a marriage license, have you ever seen in Madison County that book? Like they open this big book and they have all these marriage, so I'm thinking like, here's the book of life and you're opening it up and you're seeing all these names, just the image of the book of life and having your name, written in that. And later in Revelation, we talk about the Lamb's book of life. The blood of the Lamb is what gives you the righteousness to be included in that book. Now we could really go a long time on the idea of that name never being blotted out. We could talk about that for a long time. I don't really want to, but we could, because that's a pretty prevalent teaching. It used to be called Calvinism, once saved, always saved. Today it's more described as Reformed theology. And the idea is the preservation of the saints. In other words, that like God will always protect you and you will never lose your salvation. That's kind of with the election, predestination, and it's all kind of built on the sovereignty of God, that God knows everything. God knows what you're going to do. He knows what you're going to, he's going to know the choices that you make. But then the thing that kind of gets me is then when someone who was previously saved or elected or predestined then no longer believes, they say, well, he didn't really have faith to begin with, which is kind of a convenient catch-22 or whatever. But maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but the promise here is that your name will be in the book, that you will be acknowledged before the Father. Think about being acknowledged too. Think about Jesus. Jesus saying, even to those who, in Matthew 7, who do good things, so I never knew you. But Jesus is saying, I will know them. I will know them, and I will acknowledge their name before the Father and the angels.
Then could the where it says the one who's victorious, could that clarify it? In other words, done. So unless you chose to take your name out, like
right. The one who's victorious is the one who's been united with the one who overcame. Yeah.
What's sort of implied in "I will never blot your name out" is that there are some people that he will blot their name out.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's the other
Did
side
he
of that.
blot it out, or did they blot it out?
Did they blot it?
In other words, I chose
remove their
to
name.
take my name out. He didn't.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, either way,
Semantics, but
yeah.
I mean,
but it's just I can't reconcile what I believe to be true about the character of God and the idea that he would pick me and not this person. And I couldn't resist his grace, but this person could. Like, I just can't reconcile that with the heart of God, who wants all people to come to faith and has given that opportunity to everyone. And so the election and the predestination for me is the group of people who then decide to follow Jesus and become his disciple and make the choice. Not you, that kind of thing.
Could this be the elect? Because in Matthew, it says, you come before me, never knew you.
Mhm.
And does this have a parallel with what he said in Matthew, as far as those that come into him and saying, my name is Lord, I never knew you, is referring to those people that you blot out? Blot their name out?
Yeah. And again, is it their decision?
I don't think it's their decision. I think it says I. Pronoun refers back to I. Not they, but I.
But what are they doing? They have to be doing something for him to block them out. It's not capricious. God just says,
Right.
I don't like you.
Right.
Keep going. I think it'll answer the question.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Now, these are some hard things to wrestle with, and that belief about whether you call it once saved, always saved, or the preservation of the saints, that is as popular today as probably it's ever been. And a lot of the people that are writing a lot of the books, and I'm trying to understand it, because I understand what they're talking about, the sovereignty of God, but on a practical level, I don't really understand what they're talking about.
I think there's a passage in 1 John that they refer to a lot in there, where John says, talking about those who've gone out from them.
Yeah.
He said, had they been of us, they would not have gone out from us.
Right.
So they take that and say, well, they never really were one of us, and therefore they left.
Yeah. So how do you really know?
Tough to explain.
How do you really know until, yeah.
But also, we're not untouchable. The devil's going to seek us out, and so it is possible.
Right.
In a sense, too.
Right.
Wrote a lot of letters warning about falling away.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I'm like, why spend all that time fighting about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a niece that's Baptist, and she had a nervous break several years ago because she thought she was of the elect, was not of the elect.
Yeah, and like, what is it? Doesn't really matter what I do. You can take that into a lot of different directions.
Well, again, a little bit of a history lesson helps me understand where it came from. But in the Reformation, Martin Luther, John Calvin, they were reacting so strongly against the works-based righteousness of the Catholic Church at that time that they went totally the other way. And when you go totally the other way, you come to the conclusion, works don't matter at all.
Yeah.
And so, if works don't matter at all, then there's nothing I can do to affect my salvation. Then God chooses me. Then there's the election. If there's nothing I can do at all, then predestination, right? Nothing I can do at all, then it also means I can't do anything to affect my non-salvation. I can't become unsaved. It is totally based, Calvinism based upon that one assumption. Works don't matter at all. And that, it shows you how one philosophical shift can affect centuries of religious thought.
Yeah. And it was such an overreaction.
Total.
But if you understand the Catholic Church at that time and the corruption and like, there was bound to be some reaction and maybe even an overreaction because it was so corrupt and it was so far from gospel truth.
Psalm 69 says, let them be blotted out of the book of living, the world is righteous.
Well, we will come back to this, I'm sure, when we talk about the Lamb's Book of Life. But it's just there's a lot there to think about. But here's a church. There was nothing really positive said about Sardis. other than the few people that were holding on. Now, the church in Philadelphia is number 6. That's the next one, verse 7. And this is a church where nothing bad is said about it, which makes me feel better about the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. But I guess it's a good church. Sardis and Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the most eastern city of this kind of circle of churches. And Sardis and Philadelphia were both destroyed by an earthquake in 17 BC, and the Roman emperor rebuilt the city, and so both Sardis and Philadelphia were very loyal to the Roman emperor because of what he had done for their city. All right, so here we go in verse 7. So how does Jesus identify himself to the church in Philadelphia? These are the words of, to the angel of the church of Philadelphia, these are the words of him who is holy and true and holds the key of David, and what he opens no one can shut, and what he shuts no one can open. Okay, holy and true, I think we get that. We understand Jesus is holy, he is true, he is separate and apart from us, he is without sin. The keys of David is interesting, and it goes back to Isaiah chapter 22, when David had a servant who had a king to open and shut the door that had access to the king. So when we talk about Jesus holding the key of David, what is he holding in his hand symbolically? Access to the king, the key to open the door to give you access to the king, access to living in the kingdom. And that's Jesus who has that. And they would have understood that, at least the Jews would have understood that reference. So it talks again about Jesus' divine nature, and his relationship to the Father and our relationship to the Father through Jesus. So, you can finish these verses for me. Jesus said, no one comes to the Father but by me, or except through me, the key, the door. He said he's the door of the sheep. Jesus said this was actually Paul writing to Timothy, for there is one God and one mediator. That was a hard one. One mediator also between God and men, himself, Jesus Christ. So there's one mediator, there's one way, there's one door. Jesus holds the key. He decides when the door is open, he decides when the door is closed. He has that authority. And he has that authority because he made that possible through his life and death and resurrection. All right, let's see what Jesus says about the church in Philadelphia. Somebody read verse 8 and 9. Revelation 3, verse 8 and 9.
I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door, no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word, have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have looked. All right.
When you think of an open door, what do you think of? A couple of different ways you could probably go. If somebody says, somebody's opened a door for me, metaphorically, an opportunity. So, and then, access. So some people think that maybe because of Philadelphia's location, that they were the open door to Asia, and the gospel spreading into Asia. That's one of the ideas. So it could be an opportunity. It could be access. But the door has been opened in Philadelphia, and nobody can shut it. A portal, yeah. That'd be more. If the Bible was written today, it would probably be called a portal. Yeah. And nobody can shut it. And they have little strength. That might be few in number. That might be, it might be something about them, but they don't have a lot of strength, but they have kept his word and not denied his name. And so Jesus recognizes that and it's acknowledging that they have been faithful to what they have received. They have kept his word, not denied his name, which implies that others have. Verse 9 speaks to the the synagogue of Satan. Like, these are Jews that are probably oppressing and persecuting the Christians that are there. And Jesus says, they will one day, at least, acknowledge that I have loved you. Like, there will be a realization one day that I am for them and that they are for me, and I have acknowledged that I love them. Okay, so only good things, no criticism. So here's the promise in verse 10 and 11. Somebody read verse 10 and 11.
Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have, so that no one will take your crown.
Okay, maybe let's start with the crown. I think we understand, what is the crown representing? Victory, overcoming, through Christ, overcoming, victorious, salvation. Was it chapter 2, verse 10? Be faithful to the point of death, and you'll receive a crown of life. Like, it's a symbol of victory, victory over sin, victory over death eventually. And Jesus says, I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have, and so that no one can take your crown, which I guess implies that someone could if you didn't hold fast. All right, I'm trying to avoid verse 10 because it's so controversial. So you kept my command, you're enduring faithfully, kept you from the hour of trial that's going to come upon the whole world and the inhabitants of the earth. Wow, there are books have been written about that over and over again. So where do we start on this? So some see this as an end time event, as the second coming, and that Jesus is actually going to remove, if you've heard of the rapture, the idea of the rapture, that this is the thought that Jesus is actually going to remove his people from the earth, and there's going to be a period of tribulation and great tribulation that the rest of the earth is going to experience. And I'd like to reserve that conversation until Revelation 7.
It's better to think, though, with the trial, during the trial, there's always a judgment made. And to me, this is the way I was referred to, is that this is talking about judgment. The trial, the hour of trial, there's always at the end of that trial judgment. And I'm going to be in front of him, facing him on judgment. And it says the book of life is open. And I hope my name is written in that book of life. Entering through that open door that I'm talking. And it follows a sense of pattern of progression.
Yeah, it's again the real thing that is people are trying to figure out is, what is the hour of trial? When is the hour of trial? Is this promise only for the church in Philadelphia? Is this for all believers who faithfully endure? And again, one of the things I want to come back to is, like, this was a letter written in the first century. The promise of deliverance in verse 10, it was given to believers in Philadelphia who endure patiently. Does this promise extend beyond the people of Philadelphia? It's a future deliverance, but how far in the future? Is this something that they were going to experience? And again, I think it had to make sense on some level to the people in this church in the first century. But again, this has been understood. If you go to 1 Thessalonians 4, and we'll do that eventually, you get the word rapture is not mentioned in Scripture. It became popular through, what was the series, Left Behind? The idea that guys, this idea of being caught up in the air with Jesus when he returns. I don't think I really believe that, and we'll come back to that. But so there's all of this, this hour of trial. I think in many ways, I think it comes back to what they were experiencing, that they were going to experience something in their lifetime. That again, it's like what is going to happen now and what's going to happen in the future. Don?
Two thoughts there. Number one, if you remember the Lord's Prayer, it says, deliver me from temptation. That's one thing. And then James tells us, James 1, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptation. It strengthens your faith, makes you stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two evidence there.
Well, we're going to see in chapter 7, there is something, and in the book of Daniel, a 7-year period of judgment that's referred to as the tribulation, great tribulation, which is the second half of that. Like all of that is kind of in play for a lot of people in trying to understand, is this an end times event? Is this something that, is really just applying to the church at Philadelphia and what they were going through? That's not a great place to stop, but that's probably what we need to do, isn't it? So we'll come back to verse 12 next week. So y'all figure that out before next week. It's incredible the amount of stuff that's been written about this. I think I know what I think, but I don't. I'm not super sure about it. But I also don't know that makes a whole lot of difference to me today. If I can figure that out, I'm going to be who I am.
What's it called? Family.
Yeah, it's that one Candace Cameron got involved in, I bet.
I don't know, man, I was watching it.
Are you?
Interesting.
It's the network, I mean, that's that family, American Family, or something.
I mean,
The name of the network, I'm saying.
Yeah,
So,
something like
a lot of places.
something like, yeah. Yeah.
but it's good.
Yeah, when she left Hallmark, she got involved in that one.
Yeah, that one is a lot more down to earth. I mean, he actually blames God.
That's why she got into that, because she said, they was start pushing all this other stuff, so she used to be in a lot of movies on Hallmark, but then she got with this, I think she's involved in the production and a lot of that. Yeah.
But this was a different group of people. That was the same thing. Well, the basic was something bigger than us.
Yeah, she produces a lot of that.
This one was really good. These two, I guess they were implanted, and they were adopted. One of them, the oldest one, was adopted, but no, they weren't all, they were the same. She was adopted, and she got killed. And they found out that the second one lived and was adopted. So they found out that she was in Nashville. The family that adopted and never told her that she was not natural, she was adopted. She found out later about it, so then the boy that was well, I don't know that they actually got to the point where they have become a couple, but they were known each other. But anyway, he was trying to he found out about other siblings.
Actually, she did really well.
She got told about it, we just crushed it because she wasn't told about it. She was 24. So then she struck out. She found out, when he found her, he mentioned some things that piqued her interest. It went through the whole process. It was really good.
Yeah, I thought about getting it. I don't have it on any of my, I don't think that's on my channels, but I'll have to
We didn't know
look
about
at.
it till it showed up on DirecTV.
Yeah, I'll have to see. Maybe they've started streaming it and I